Thank you very much. It is really an honor for me to be here for anything named for one of my heroes, Jim Wright. I watched this Netflix show that says the House of Cards. Let me tell you something. The only person that holds all the cards is the Speaker of the House in Washington, D.C., and he held all those cards. The only time I've seen him not very good at something was he and I and D. Kelly were quail hunting on San Jose Island one time, and Dee almost shot you, but other than that, we survived it. It's kind of a funny story. You remind me of something, Professor, when you said comptroller and controller. After Ann Richards was defeated for governor by George Bush, we had this prayer breakfast, and it was the source of my greatest line in all of my time in public service. And George Bush was introducing all of the elected officials there, and he said, Governor Bullock is here, General Morales is here, and he gets to me and he says, Comptroller, what should I call you? And I said, I don't know, the last governor called me darling. And it turned out to be one of my very best lines. I'm so proud of it. Now, for those of you that fear that you have a recovering politician that's going to give you an hour or 2 hour speech, I'm not. I'm an Aggie. I give Aggie speeches, which are by definition short and to the point, as opposed to Longhorn speeches, which have point here, and mostly go in between. But it is good to be here. Speaking of short speeches, I'm going to tell this one little story and then I'm going to get serious. I used to give very long speeches. I learned not to do that after a session of the legislature on something called brucellosis, which is a sexually transmitted disease of cattle, which I had fortunately never had, didn't know anybody that had it, didn't know anything about the disease. I just voted against it because I thought that's what kind of my district wanted. That was wrong. The Farm Bureau objected to it, made me go down to West Columbia, Texas, in my district to give this speech about why I voted this way on this particular cow disease. I went to the hall. There were down power lines everywhere. There was high water in the roads. I walked into the hall that seated 1,000 people, and there were 6 folks in that hall. And what had happened was Hurricane Alicia had come through 6 days before, and they forgot to tell me and apparently these 6 other Aggies that this deal had been called off. And so one guy was there, and he said, look, I came from, other side of the county to hear this speech. I'd like to hear it. And I had written an hour-long speech, so I gave it. I started. By the time 30 minutes was done, 5 of them were gone already. One guy left. He was asleep, and so I just quit. And I just woke him up and said, Mr. McAllister, what did you think about my speech? And he wiped his eyes and he said, look, son, I'm going to give you some advice. As long as you're asking folks for their vote, you need to hear what I have to say. And I said, what's that? And he said, every winter, when the winters are cold and hard, I go out there once a week to my 300 cows that I run, and I give them a whole tractor trailer load of hay and shoes to these cows. But I want you to remember something. As long as you're asking people for their vote, I said, what's that? And he said, if only 6 of my cows show up, I don't drop the whole damn load on them. I appreciate, as I said, being here, especially with Speaker Wright, who is not only Fort Worth's favorite son, but one of the all-time leading favorite sons of the state of Texas. Thank you for your service and what you've done for this state and for what you've done for this nation. I'm also pleased to be here with Dr. Rick Berger. I enjoy reading his quotes in the paper. And every time I see him, it reminds me that the font of all political knowledge is not in Austin, Texas. It's in other universities around the state of Texas. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is the crossroads that I believe that the state of Texas is about. We have great universities. TCU obviously is one of those universities. We spent a lot of time at A&M copying TCU, by the way. You build a stadium, we decide we're going to build a stadium. We hire the same people that built your stadium to build our stadium. Your former athletic directors are now at Texas A&M by way of South Carolina. If I had my way 2 years ago, a guy named Patterson would have been in College Station, but that didn't work out. What a wonderfully great institution we have. And we are very proud to be a part of Fort Worth once again. Charlotte and I have a special affinity for Fort Worth because our daughter, Mike McMahon is here, who used to be director of the Gladney Center. Our daughter, Victoria, came from the Gladney Center. She still to this day tells people she's from Cowtown, not Austin, not College Station, not any place else. And we're very proud of that. But now that we have a Texas A&M Law School right in the midst of Fort Worth, we are especially pleased to be here. And you're going to see A&M make some very serious monetary investments in that law school, and you will see it move to the top tiers faster than any law school in this country has ever done. I will predict it. It's going to be, we're very proud of it. We're proud to be a part of this community. We're right on the process of selecting a new dean. We think you're going to be very impressed with that person. It's down to the top 2 right now, and we're going to make some investments. One of the interesting things about it, nationwide, law school entrances are down about 18% nationwide, and this law school is up 16%. It's virtually the only law school in the country that has had a dramatic rise in the number of young men and women coming to that law school. I especially am fond of the students that are here, particularly those that are in political science. I met some young men and women that were political science majors that obviously want to go into politics. I met some young ladies that were business majors, and my advice to the young men that were political scientists is make sure you know this person well, because they're going to make the money that's going to finance your campaigns before you get. But I want to talk a little bit about the good and the bad of what is headed to Texas. There's some marvelous universities. You're proud, and we're all proud of what TCU means. We're proud of what Texas A&M is, largest research university in the Southwest. But one of the things that is going to determine whether or not the state of Texas has true economic progress in the future is going to soon be on our horizon. If you look back at the history economically of the state of Texas, you will find 3 distinct empires, literal empires, where Texas dominated the rest of the country economically. So much so that you had signs, in Colorado that said Texas, God wanted Texans to ski, and to give them a mountain, and all kinds of things like that, derogatory, nasty things. The truth of the matter is, God gave us Colorado, we gave it back. In 1863, when we joined the Union, we got kind of messed with it. And then we knew we could buy stuff there anyway. But we had 3 distinct empires. The very first one was built on cattle. When the Union soldiers acquired a taste for beef, and all of a sudden these wild cattle that were running all over, particularly the south of Texas, and they discovered things like Chisholm Trail, which forked just south of here, and one fork went to the stockyards and one fork went straight to Kansas. That created financial empires that were the envy of the rest of the country. Only people like the Rockefellers way later on would have that kind of influence. After cattle was something called cotton. You don't think Texas had cotton, but frankly, we had 2 or 3 times as much cotton as Mississippi and places like that. We had the last battle of the Civil War was over 23 bales of cotton in Brownsville, and that battle occurred 6 weeks after the war was over. And so it had nothing to do with the war. It had to do with the worth of that cotton as it was shipped to the United Kingdom and Britain. And that created huge financial empires all over the state of Texas. And the third one had to do with little something called oil and gas. Little discovery called Spindletop, Corsicana, and those things like that spawned the oil and gas and petrochemical industry created empires that even dwarf the other two before them. And all of those three still exist. And they will exist for the rest of my lifetime and everybody in this room. But they will not be the dominant thing that decides the fate and future of the state of Texas. What will decide that is something else. Those three things have one thing in common. I had an old economics professor one time at Texas A&M, a guy named Graham. He ran for office or something, I can't remember what he's doing now. But he used to say, and I think accurately, you only have three things to sell in free enterprise. You sell natural resources, you sell capital resources, which are a combination of capital and human, or you sell human resources. And we have built this state on one of those things, and that is natural resources. If you look back at the wealth that has come historically to the state of Texas, it has come from natural resources. Now we have a different dynamic. Instead of the cattle, instead of the cotton, instead of the oil and gas and petrochemicals being new to the horizon, all of a sudden we have an advantage in the state of Texas, or a disadvantage, depending on how this plays out. That is amazing. The state of Texas has more 18 to 20-year-olds within the borders of the state of Texas than any place in the country. There is only one sliver of another state that can rival us in terms of the number of young people, and that is an area within a 50-mile radius of Provo, Utah. And all you have to do is think a little bit about Provo, Utah. A good Mormon family has 8 kids per family, things like that. But that's the only place. What we do in Texas, one of the things we do very well is we have lots of young people. The enthusiasm of your average Texas family is absolutely amazing. But it has to do with economic development. And the reason it does is because when Bob Bullock was controller of public accounts right before me, he would have told you that when businesses looked at Texas and came to Texas, they would ask questions like, do you have an income tax? Tell me about the tax policies, things like that. What kind of incentives you get? When I was controller from 1991 to 1998, I never got that question from a single business that was coming in the state of Texas. What I got was, how many 18 to 21-year-olds live in Dallas County? How many live in Bexar County? How many live in Victoria? How many live in Beaumont and Austin? And the reason they asked that question is because there is beginning to be at that time, and now becoming more acute, a shortage of young men and women to go into a workforce. And the last thing that they wanted was to locate a plant or locate a billion-dollar facility and all of a sudden have to pay skyrocketing rates and import people to come in and work in these businesses. And so they were concerned about that. That was the first question. The second question they always asked was, tell me the education level of those young men and women. And if the education level was low, if the college graduates were low, if the dropout rate was high, they went somewhere else. Now, that is the future of the state of Texas. The next 30 years, and how we treat those little spindle tops sitting in your first grade classes are going to determine what the wealth of the people and the families in this room are 20 and 30 years from now. If you are the richest person in this room, your kids will stay that way, depending more on how we educate these young men and women than almost anything else. It is absolutely crucial, because if we produce the largest workforce in the country, which we will, that is a given. That's probably not going to stop. And they are the highest trained, best educated young men and women that exist anywhere in the country. We will create a fourth empire that will make cattle, cotton, oil and gas look like a barn dance in comparison. However, if they are the largest group of young men and women and the most uneducated, we will join Mississippi within 30 years in every bad category that exists. That's the future we're going to decide. You cannot have mediocre universities. You cannot have mediocre high schools. You cannot have mediocre elementary schools. And we've got to start looking at elementary schools and public schools as if it was there for the children and not for the interest groups that are making money off of those particular schools. We have got to start paying attention to the most important economic development tool that we have, and the greatest asset that we have in the state of Texas, and that is those kids sitting in that first grade class. Now, let me tell you about those kids in your first grade class right now. 60% of the kids in public schools in Texas live below the poverty line right now. Those kids have got to be paid attention to. We as universities, whether it's TCU or A&M or any place else, have got to go into those classrooms, even in elementary school, and talk about what a college education is about. The single biggest factor about whether somebody goes to college is whether or not there was somebody in the family that went to college as well. Every time I speak to a college commencement, I always ask the question. I said, everybody that is the first in your family ever, in your history of your family to graduate from college, please stand up. And there is always a ton of them. And there is just an uproar of applause for those young men and women. The reason those young men and women are special is because by being there that day and getting that sheepskin and graduating, they completely change the future of their family. Because all of a sudden the question at the dinner table is not, are you going to go to college? It becomes, where are you going to go to college? And that is the single most important factor. The second most important factor is exposure. Getting a first grader, second grader, third grader, fourth grader, eighth grader to talk about almost at A&M, to talk about going to college. And to make sure that that is something that's not a trip to the moon, a trip to Mars. It's so far out of reach that nobody would even think about it, but that it is something that is there and worth pursuing. Because if we do this right, we're going to create an economic development program in the state of Texas that literally is going to smoke everybody else that don't have the resources to compete with us. Our kids aren't moving out of state. Their kids are tending to move here to take up for vacancies and things like that in the workforce that are here. That's the future. I don't know what the future is going to be, but I know that in some places in Texas, if we keep doing what we're doing in the public school system, that future is going to look more like Mississippi than it is a great, bountiful state of Texas. We have to be the best. We have to be the best not only in the universities. And fortunately, our universities are the best. They're some of the best in the country. Whether it's TCU or whether it's Texas A&M or whether it's University of Texas or any place else, that is what has driven much of the economic innovation within the state of Texas. Engineers, for instance, are crucially important for the future of the state of Texas. And one of the things that we're struggling with is that while you look at Texas A&M and you look at the vet school, all of a sudden 80% of the vet students are women. If you look at the business school, way over 50% of the business school now is women. When you look at engineering, it's still 80 and 90% men. And so we did a lot of work trying to figure out why this is, why women, young ladies, aren't attracted to engineering. And it's because many of them think that it has to do with building roads or building buildings or building capital projects and things like that. So one of the things that we're interested in doing that we think is a key ingredient toward this new Texas with a great education has to do with engineering. Let me give you an example. And universities have to change their way of thinking. For whatever reason, every top 10 engineering school in the nation has about 10 or 11,000 students. There is this glass wall, by God, we don't go past 11,000, or good Lord will strike us and we're dead, or whatever it is, but every one of them, whether it's Texas A&M, whether it's University of Texas, whether it's Cornell, whatever, it's just about 10,000 students. Our engineering dean looked at that and said, look, we accept about 1,600 engineering students as freshmen. We have another 1,600 that you really can't tell the difference between the first 1,600 and the second one. Maybe 5 points on an SAT or 10 points on an SAT score and stuff like that. So she said, we want to take those kids too. So she made a commitment that our 11,000 person student engineering center in 2025 will be 25,000. We will grow from 11,000 engineering students to 25,000 engineering students on the Texas A&M campus between now and the year 2025. And the quality won't be any different than it is right now. We'll still be a top 10 engineering student. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the ways that you're going to do that is you have to have feeder schools. One of the ways that you're going to do that is you're going to have to partner with community colleges and say, we want you to start allowing us to teach certain courses to prepare young men and women after 2 years of community college to go to engineering. I personally think, and I think the dean thinks too, that you have to go into high schools. And if they won't take you into high schools, then create your own high school called Texas A&M Engineering Academy or something, and get those kids in there from all around the state, Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, every place else, and start producing engineers. Why is that a big deal? Not because they have great personality. You have to need an engineer with great personality. It is because engineers are the source of innovation. Engineers, whether you like it or not, are who produce new things that none of us are thinking about. And that's one of the ways that we're going to do that. One of the things that I'm proud of this university, Texas A&M, and others about, and most of the universities in Texas, is they still produce teachers. Teaching is an important part. There isn't anybody in this new Texas more important, engineers included, than a teacher, a good one, sitting in front of every one of those classrooms. And a lot of universities, Yale, Harvard, some of these folks, when they get to a certain status, they think we're too good to be producing educators. That's not what we're about. That will never happen at Texas A&M. We produce 40% of all of the teachers in the classrooms in the state of Texas today. And the ones that we believe are in some of the most high demand. But that is one of the single most important things we do. The second thing that we have committed ourselves to doing is to producing the largest number of STEM teachers for our students today. Those math and science teachers that are extremely important, particularly in the elementary grades and as those children, young men and women move up through that process. And so I think there's an awful good chance that this is going to be a really bright future for the state of Texas. But a whole bunch of it depends on local school boards and parents and folks that run the local school districts. Because unless the Dallas Independent School District produces quality graduates, and I mean not just some that are in the top 10%, I mean all the way down the gamut of those teachers, and unless Fort Worth does that, and unless all the other public school districts in the state do that, we have got a bleak future ahead of us in the state of Texas. And so that's what, to us, is singularly most important. And one of the things that happens at Texas A&M, and the worst part of this job, is when admissions come in. So we get, particularly when you have a Heisman Trophy winner, for some reason you get lots of kids that want to come to your university. So we had 20,000 applied on the last day. Well, we used to, when I was a student, we had 20,000 apply over a 5-year period of time. But when you have about 40,000 students apply and you're taking less than 10, that becomes a problem. And so we have to work with other universities within our system. We have great universities like Charleston and Stephenville, we have Kingsville, Corpus Christi, Laredo, Canyon, Texarkana, different places, Prairie View, and others. And so one of the things we have to start doing is treating it all as if it's a seamless process. Well, maybe you couldn't get into Texas A&M University in College Station, or maybe you couldn't get into UT Austin, but you can go to Texas A&M San Antonio, or you can go to Texas A&M in San Antonio, and after a year, if you make a certain amount of grades, you're automatically admitted into engineering and things like that. But to quit treating each other as if we were individually, competitive against each other, and it all becomes there for one single purpose, and that is to educate a whole bunch of kids. And so what we're about, Let me tell you about the second part of economic development. It has to do with big research universities and what they do. Every Wednesday or so, whenever I get a chance, I always meet with some researchers. And, you know, I mean, I don't tell them what my grade point ratio is, but my classmate, Rick Perry, mine was higher than his, and mine wasn't anything right. But when I meet with these people, it is just absolutely amazing the minds we have in these universities that talk about things that are going to be commercialized. There will be a time shortly that you will see containers moving from the Houston Ship Channel all the way down the middle of I-35 and I-45, 60 miles an hour at half the cost of a truck, and move to the north end of Dallas and then get on trucks and move to the rest of the country. They will move from Monterey 60 miles an hour through the border. You won't have congestion anymore because researchers, engineers have figured out how to move those things electrically one car at a time with a little bitty engine. My contribution to this is to make sure that the one that moves through Austin has a little TAM on it so that as it goes through that particular part of I-35, we get our due credit. All kinds of things like that are game changing. And that's fine and that's wonderful, but at the end of the day, if we do not produce from our public school systems the young men and young women to fill these colleges and universities, then we fail. And the state of Texas will be a basket case by 2050 if that doesn't change in some of our school districts. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Speaker Wright, especially with you and all the good people in Fort Worth. We consider Fort Worth a dear partner of ours right now, and can't wait to produce one of the very top law schools that exist in the United States of America. Thank you all for having me.